Thank you to all my channel members, including my fan appreciation level members and my contributor level members, for helping support the YouTube channel. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my February reading review. I actually had a generally very good February, particularly the first half of the month. I was doing great. I was ahead of schedule. I was reading so much. The second half of February, I slowed down quite a bit, but I still did a lot. I did not do as much as January. January was my best month ever of reading. I did 19 books then. That was not the case in February. February, I did 13 books, which is still great for me. My average is somewhere between 8 on the low end and 12 on the high end. So this is still, and I've said that for years, and that previously was my general rule. So this is still above what my general rule was. So that's still really good. For my 13 books, I had 4 books that were like top tier, 5 out of 5. I had 4 books that were really good, and I would give 4 out of 5. I had 4 books that were 3 out of 5, where I'm like, it was okay. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but it was okay. And then I had 1 more 1 star. I cannot believe I never have 2 months in a row with 1 stars. That has not happened in years, but apparently happened. I had a 1 star in January. I have a 1 star review in February. This book is slightly better than my 1 star from January. But let's go ahead and kick it off with my only 1 star book this month, which is Elegy for a Lost Star. I have a full review on the YouTube channel for it. It's book 5 in the Symphony of Ages. It's just not a good book. I'm so frustrated with everything Elizabeth Hayden did because she makes promises in one book and then she doesn't exactly deliver on them. She delivers on them just enough that it makes logical sense, but it's not on what the expectation really of what she was setting up. And the characters are just handled wrong. I think that the plot is handled wrong. I think the focus, it has amazing individual scenes that I love. But when you put it all together, it's just such a sloppy mess. And I was just so angry by this. To the point, and this never happens. Not ever. It rarely happens. I took the next book, which was on my March TBR, off the TBR. I had such a bad experience, I said, I'm not continuing on for now. I have book 6 on my shelves. I might continue it one day, but for right now, I was like, I'm going to put a book that I actually want to do. So I put it up to my channel members to vote on what the fantasy book for March would be. So if you want to be able to vote on things like that, vote in the channel member polls. But did not care for this at all. The one book I just couldn't stand this month. Goes up from here. I had 4 books that I would put in the 3 out of 5 category, where I'm like, this was an okay book. Had stuff I didn't like, had stuff I liked. So that we talk about my book number 13 for the month. Right above that, in number 12, would be Star Trek Challengers Gateways Chainmail by Diane Carey. Way too many titles here. Way too many titles. This is the second book in the Gateways series. I'm reading it for Literary Treks, and there is a movie reviewer named Jeremy Johns who has a category of review where he'll say at the end that he's going to forget this movie in T-2 days, and I said, there's no way I would forget what happens in a movie or something like that, or like in a book, 2 days after I finish it. I'm not kidding you. I read this book, and then like 2 days later, I went to record with Casey Pettit, and I could not, for the life of me, remember what happened in the last act, because I just did not particularly care for it, and it just kind of was unmemorable. And that's not good in a book. That is not good in a book. And but the first half I thought was really good, but the second half was not great. So that was that book. My number 11 book of the month was Star Wars: The Clone Wars No Prisoners. This is an EU book that ties into the Clone Wars series. It ties in with Pelion from the Thrawn stuff. It ties into Callista from the Callista trilogy. It ties into Ahsoka and Rex from the Clone Wars show. The first half of this book was really well handled, and it had some really cool scenes. But the second half of the book is all action, and sadly, Karen Traviss is not a good action writer. She is great when there's no action going on and her character is like sitting in a room talking. She's fantastic. That's why the first act was so good. Second half of this book, which is really short. This is a really short book. It's just 250 pages in trade paperback, so it might be like 300 in mass market, but it's still a really short book. Second half of this book, so incredibly just unmemorable because it's just action and it's generic and it doesn't have anything that really ties it and makes you go, oh yeah, I really like this. So yeah, that was book 11. Book 10 is another Star Wars book. That's Jedi Healer, the second MedStar book. I actually liked this a lot better than book 1, which I read last month. I liked this one a lot better. So this is actually a pretty good book. It's a solid 3-star. It's not a favorite by any stretch of the mind, but I actually liked what was happening with some of the characters, some of the twists. The main plot is still pretty weak, and that's what drags it down, but the character work in this book is actually pretty good. So I did enjoy this stuff. Then we have the last of the 3 out of 5 is going to be Salvage System by Kevin Steverson. This is a military soft science fiction series. In fact, I actually interviewed Kevin about a week or so ago. So look up Kevin Steverson interview Jonathan Cohn. We talk about this whole trilogy, this whole universe that he's created. He talks about working on a movie for it. It's a lot of fun. But this book was the weakest of the trilogy, sadly. It had cool ideas. Execution wasn't great. So those were my 3 out of 5 stars. Let's bump up. Now we're going to talk about my top 8. We're talking about the next set of 4 books that I'll talk about are my 4 out of 5 star books. And I'm really excited about these because these were good books. These weren't amazing books, but they were good books. And I'm going to start with talking about God's Country by J.T. Ringo. This is a self-published book. J.T. Ringo reached out to me, asked me about sending me a copy. I have a connection to J.T. and I thought it looked kind of interesting. Western is not a genre I'm normally used to. It's very much a classic style Western. It has 2 extremes. It is both very much optimistic about the future of America while also being incredibly realistic about the grit and the grime and what settling the West was actually really like. And it is impressive that J.T. Ringo was able to capture both polar opposite sentiments, the hope and the despair at the exact same time. That was incredible. The writing in the first portion of the book is really bad, is really not up to par as a writer, really should have been polished. But the writing in the second half of the book was stellar. Not the second 2/3. The book gets really good about midway through and then just keeps getting better and better. So this is, one of those books that, you start reading it, you're like, it's not that good, but it gets better by the end. It's a solid, it's like 3.5, 4 out of 5. It's an entertaining book, and I had a fun time with it. I also have another Monster Hunter book, Monster Hunter Alpha. I read the first 2 Monster Hunter books last year. I plan to read the next 2 Monster Hunter books this year, this one and the next one next month. And I really enjoyed Monster Hunter Alpha. Not as much as I enjoyed the first 2 books, but it's still a great book. It's third person following Earl Harbinger, whereas the first 2 books are first person following Owen Pitt. So it's following a different character, so it kind of throws off the formula, but it's a fun, schlocky, fun action book. It's a little bit long in places, but it was a fun book. I really enjoyed this one. Another solid 4 out of 5. Another solid book was the next omnibus of One Piece. This omnibus of One Piece is fantastic. This is continuing on the series of Monkey D. Luffy and his pirates, the Straw Hat Pirates. This is the book where the first half of the book is talking about trying to save the city and trying to stop Calidor, the evil turncoat butler for this girl turned into he was actually a pirate the whole time, secretly, and was, hiring people to do evil stuff. First half of this book is so good. Then it gets to the whole Verity ship, the restaurant ship, and I didn't love that part of the book, but it's still a really good book. And so this is another solid 4 out of 5. Loving this series. And by the way, again, as with all my reviews, or books that I'm talking about, the review is either currently up or will be up soon. And this one I know is already up, so go check it out. I also read and reviewed, and this was of like the best 4-star out of 5 was The Racketeer by John Grisham. Again, this one's already out, the review, and it's another solid John Grisham book. He pulls off some really difficult narrative structure stuff. This is getting into the weeds of stuff, but I really was impressed by what he was able to pull off in this book. But it's actually quite a fun book. It's a legal thriller, but it really is a thriller because he puts like people are being chased by the FBI, they're being chased by murderers, they're being chased by all this stuff. So it's actually a really fun book. So I really liked it. So this is a really good book. But now we are in the top 4 books, these are the 5-star out of 5. These were the great books that I read this month. And these were superb. I have mostly positive, if not almost all positive things to say about these books. So my 4th best book of the month is actually a book I don't have a physical copy of because it's not out yet. That is going to be Gallifile by Terry Brooks. This book comes out on the 11th. I will have a review out on release day. The day the book comes out is when my review will come out. But I loved this book. Return to form for Terry Brooks, returning to not only the series that everyone loves, Shannara, but returning to a period in the series that we as fans have been begging him to return to. We've been saying, you have this huge area open that you've done nothing with, and that's like the most interesting thing to us. And he did a really good job. This is not what I thought the book was going to be whatsoever. Completely different than what I expected it to be. And it both feels, it's like that rhyme, something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. This book is something old with the style, something new with something new that he does that shakes up the series. There's also something borrowed in that he takes tropes from a different part of the Lord of the Rings than he did before, and takes tropes from Star Wars that he's never taken before. And then we have the something blue. So it actually fits that rhyme. But Gallifile is a very, very good book. Super excited to do a full review on it on March 11th. I also read another new release, which that video is already up, and that is Reign of the Empire, The Mask of Fear. This was the only February release that I had on my schedule. This is by Alexander Freed. It's the new Star Wars book. If you like Andor, the TV show, Season 1, because Season 2 isn't out yet, if you liked Andor Season 1, you will love this book. This is a superb book. Andor, the character, is not in this, but Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera are in this, and it's fantastic. There are parts of it I didn't like. The minor characters, the original characters that Alexander Freed created for this book, didn't like them. But the big 3 are handled very well, particularly Mon Mothma and Bail Organa. They're handled superbly in this book and has some really interesting context for Star Wars as a whole. So I really liked this book. And it's a beefy book. You're getting bang for your buck with this story. I also read, and this book could have been the book of the month if it had not been for the other book of the month, but that was The Strangled Queen by Maurice Druon. It is a historical fiction. It is a superb, short book. Maurice Druon, despite writing back in the 50s, gets what makes political intrigue interesting today. Again, it's very Game of Thronesy. There's multiple ways that it reminded me of Game of Thrones, but the whole idea of writing about scandals without being explicit. This is what Game of Thrones missed. George R. R. Martin felt that you have to be explicit in writing about scandals, and Maurice Druon proves you do not. And maybe it's because at the time period, in the 50s, this was explicit at the 50s, and in the 90s when he wrote Game of Thrones, it was standard was different. But still, I loved this. I love this story. I love Maurice Druon's writing style. I love the history that he pulls in. I love that he's writing a historical series and he's just fudging a little bit of the elements of it, like making up a little bit. But it's so good. It's so good. I love this series. This would have been my book of the month if I had not read my book of the month. This book, it came out of left field. I did not expect it to be that good, but it was great. So Joe Schreiber, He wrote 3 Star Wars EU books. He wrote Death Troopers, which I thought was good. It wasn't amazing, but it was a fine, good read. And then I read Red Harvest, which was great, and I had a blast with it. And so I was actually kind of excited to get into Maul Lockdown, and I read Maul Lockdown, and this is my book of the month, top tier EU book. And I will have a full review in a couple of weeks. But this book was amazing, and it was so refreshing, and it did something that a lot of late-era EU books did that I liked, which is it focuses on a major character, but does it in a very unique way. This book is the antithesis of Kenobi by John Jackson Miller, which is my favorite Star Wars novel of all time, favorite EU, favorite Star Wars novel. It's my second favorite novel of all time. So Kenobi, I love that book so much. This is very similar in some story structure ways, and in fact, the way that Joe Schreiber handles some things in here feels like I almost wonder if he talked to John, and I want to ask John Jackson Miller if he had communication, because it is so impressive, the similarities, and I loved this book. It just does so many things right, and it was refreshing, and it was different, and it's brutal. It's very violence-wise, it's brutal and R-rated. It's very PG and everything else, but in violence it's R-rated, so just be noting that when you go in to read the book. But it's great. It's very different than the Darth Maul Shadowhunter. Very different style story, but still very good. So those are all of the 13 books that I read in the month of March. It was February. That's crazy. These were the 13 books that I read in February. I absolutely loved reading this month. Even though I had some stinkers, I still got a lot in there. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get to 13. If I can do 12 in March, I think I'll be pretty happy. I'd love to do 13, 14, 15 more. We'll see what happens. But I did 13 books in February. I'm already at 32 books for the year, which is way ahead of any time I've ever been in the past. So I'm very excited to see what the future looks like. So if you've read any of the books I talked about today, let me know your thoughts on them in the comment section. What did you read in the month of February yourself? And what do you plan to read next month? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel. If you want to become a channel member, please become a channel member. Hit the join button. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.